This is the Mind Body Detox Podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom for how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back, everyone, to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. I'm your host, Mind Body Medium Kara Lovehart, and today I'm joined with Zach Detwiler, and he is the owner of Thrive Fitness here in my hometown, York, PA. And he is a personal trainer and wellness coach with over 13 years experience. He's been doing his own thing and helping people thrive through his holistic approach to movement and mindset and nutrition. So combining these all together. So Zach helps clients create sustainable results. And this is what we always want, right? Having a healthy relationship with their bodies and with fitness. So we're going to dive into how movement can be medicine today. That is our topic. And specifically redefining fitness, longevity, and intuitive strength. So let's bring on Zach and learn a little bit about him and dive into how we can use fitness as medicine. Welcome to the show, Zach.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I met you, we were talking before we started live, that we have been doing our own health and wellness thing alongside each other as entrepreneurs. And I met you years ago at my local gym, and now you're doing your own thing with Thrive Fitness. And so I'm curious, what in general got you into fitness, and how has your philosophy changed from there until now? So we can segue into the fitness as medicine piece.
I started my passion for movement back when I was younger. I played a lot of sports growing up, including soccer. I tried basketball for a period of time, track and field, football, lacrosse, and played a few of those throughout high school. And I always had a passion for health as well, but that really took off when I moved away from the area out to California, where I lived for about 2.5 years. And I just started to go back to my roots of finding interest in health and wellness and movement. And then when I moved back home, ended up finding a job at a local gym. And then that eventually led to becoming certified as a personal trainer, eventually managing personal trainers, and then now having my own business.
So as far as when you first started with personal training, what were the ways that you thought about this work for helping your clients and even yourself? And how has that changed moving into more like functional movement? Like what really started and changed for you? Because I think it might also help our listeners who, when they first start getting with a personal trainer and someone who's new, right? And then how maybe they get a different personal trainer over the years that's more evolved, more experienced, how that progression from different types of personalities maybe evolves.
Yeah. So your question is about as far as the evolution of working with different trainers?
How did you evolve in your evolution of fitness for your own self? Like what your philosophy on it when you first started and versus now?
Yeah. When I first started, I remember my very first client. He was a recreational basketball player, and I knew nothing about the sport really, other than playing growing up. And I spent hours creating a program for him and thought it was the perfect program. And in hindsight, maybe it was, but not looking at the person, but looking at the program and designing the program around the person versus the opposite. I think that's where, when I first started, it was how do I create the perfect program? Now it's how can I create a program based on the client that's in front of me, their lifestyle, their level of stress, what are their goals? What are their specific needs when it comes to adapting a program that works for them rather than trying to fit them into a program that I've created. So a lot of it over the years has been just coming to see that there is no one size fits all. There's no cookie cutter program that's going to work for everyone, but there are frameworks. And I think that where I've come to now is that there's frameworks that work for specific goals, and taking a framework, making adaptations to that based on the client you're working with really goes a long way.
And that's really the integrative model of looking at the person individually and integrating the pieces that you've learned over the years that fit that personality type and what their needs are. What are the needs that you find often in maybe a different type of clients? Do you have dads? Do you have stay-at-home moms? Do you have athletes? I'm sure there's different types of clients you work with. I'd love to hear some of the examples of some of the most common needs you hear for people. Is it more diet? Is it more consistency? Is it just drinking more water? What do you find that's common in these different populations you work with?
Yeah, I'd say when I first started, it was more general, more broad in who I worked with. I'd take on anyone, work with anyone. Over the years, I've been drawn to work with older adults. When you have a body that's been through decades of injuries, decades of movement, sometimes poor quality movement, or poor lifestyle habits, later on in life that starts to stack up, and then you have chronic health issues that come up. I enjoy challenges. I like to solve problems. I think that population tends to deal with more chronic health issues. And there's things that are easy to implement and aren't complicated, aren't strenuous, overly strenuous, and they offer pretty quick wins when it comes to somebody first starting out. Older adults is definitely a group that I've worked a lot with over the years. Another group that I've recently pivoted to is dads who specifically are entrepreneurs like myself, single dads who are struggling with trying to find time in their day or in their schedule just to make time for themselves. They're focused on everyone else, and that leaves very little time for themselves. So just starting to create awareness around schedule, around what are the minimums that if you hit those daily, weekly, monthly, that you can still get the minimum effective dose of whatever it is that your body needs. Like myself, because as you probably know, days sometimes are stacked back to back, and meals sometimes don't happen. Sometimes movement doesn't happen that you intend to do throughout the day. Long days and energy to set aside time to do a workout often isn't at the top of the priority list. I think redefining what that looks like, what a balanced day looks like for entrepreneurs is another group I'm really drawn to.
Yes. I think also, even if they're not an entrepreneur, I feel like the busyness of life, even for parents, you said single dads or single moms, or even people who are married and have multiple parents driving children to and from soccer practice, and they have daily chores, their regular work stuff. I wanted to say about the older populations, what I was curious about are some of the wins you were talking about with movements, the simple things that you can introduce for that population. What are the signs and symptoms that maybe they have aches and pains? What are the things that they can work with you, they can overcome? Because in my mind, I'm thinking that people might think fitness is just for losing weight. For you, it's more bit mobility. It's a lot of different things, but I feel like that's where people's brains usually go. I want to get fit. I want to look
Yeah.
good, and it's more just for aesthetic. But tell us more about some of the benefits for maybe all the populations, but the older population first.
Yeah. One thing that I found is really common amongst the older population is they've reached a point where those things I mentioned, the chronic health issues, have stacked up, but it's gotten to a point where they realize if I don't take action on this now, then I'm not going to be around to be with my grandkids. I'm not going to be able to travel anymore. Like I worked my entire life. I was told that if I do this and retire, then I could travel. I can spend time with my family. I can continue to be active. And they're finding that they can't because there's some sort of physical limitation with that. So a really big win for somebody like that getting started is really just starting to create body awareness. And that looks like going through, an assessment to see things like their biological age versus what their actual age is, their mobility, are they able to get up and sit down in a chair without using their hands or without using some form of support? Are they able to get down on the ground and get back up without it taking 2 minutes or 3 minutes? Are they able to move into positions, God forbid they fall and need to get back up? So these are all things that we don't think about when we're younger. They're often not that important because you just take it for granted. You think you get up out of bed in the morning, you do what you need to do. But yeah, as these things start to stack up later in life, you just notice that more limitation rather means less activity, and then those limitations limit everything else that you can do. So I love meeting with clients of that age because you get them on a simple program, just getting started. They start to do body weight exercises, and within a few weeks, they're starting to notice, I feel better. I can do this activity with my grandchild I couldn't do before. I'm sleeping better. And the list starts to stack up of all the other benefits that they weren't even attributing to doing some sort of movement routine.
So I'm thinking about my grandmother who she lived till she was 96, I believe. And I remember when my son was 2, she was probably around like 89. She was like getting down on the floor, crawling around on the floor with him and getting up. She was always so active. And then my other grandmother is she looks amazing. And we're always like, what's your secret? And she's, I do Tai Chi and yoga like this many
Wow.
times a week. And she's really limber and just, she looks so youthful and she's always full of energy. And I noticed it went down when she had a surgery. She had a hip replacement surgery and
Mhm.
she couldn't move. And so afterwards, her mobility and everything started to go downhill until she started gently going back and creating that movement. And then again, like you said, her stress levels were up, sleep was impacted, and
Mhm.
you could see like even the mind, like mentally, not that it was like more in dementia territory, but it was like there was a lot of just everything, the whole system was dysregulated from not having that movement, which she was normally used to. Yeah. What about bone density? I know osteoporosis is a big thing for aging women.
Bone density is very important. It's one of those risk factors with falls. If you have a fall, if you have low bone density, you're that much more likely to have a much longer recovery, as well as breaking a bone if you fall. So, bone density is hugely important. And then with exercise, strength training, doing exercises that involve some sort of resistance or weights, as well as power training, which involves quicker movements that activate different muscle fibers. And it also prepares your body for losing balance. So we think balance is like you stand on one leg and you see how long you can hold it. Balance is also reactive, where if you lose your balance, training for losing your balance by regaining it quicker is a really effective way to train balance and to prevent things like falls that eventually lead to needing some sort of a surgery or something that can be really debilitating. How that ties back to, yeah, to bone density is if you're doing that in the form of exercise and in that realm, it's likely that you're going to be maintaining that much longer than you would if you're not.
Yeah. I love the support for moving into life with more movement, more mobility, more energy, even from just the movement, and then more confidence. And then that joy, like you said, of being able to play with your grandchildren and that kind of thing. But let's kind of segue into pain because pain hits
Mhm.
all populations. And of course, injuries too from just regular day to day. But how do you work with, we'll start with pain in your practice, and then we can segue into how do you work with prevention of injuries?
So I've been personal training for 13 years now, and I don't have a formal degree, but I love learning. I've learned a lot. And despite all that I've learned over the years, there's still things within my scope of practice that I don't do, which is why I think it's really important as a side note to create, if you're a health professional, to have a network of other professionals who you can refer out to in your that are beyond your scope of practice. With that said, I don't really deal with pain in the sense of addressing pain. Indirectly through exercise, there are certain things that you can do to minimize pain. Obviously, creating a program that is specialized to the person rather than that kind of cookie cutter program that you see a lot. That's going to be a huge impact on. If somebody's in pain, oftentimes I'll be referring out for whatever that is. Most of the time, it's beyond my scope. But there is a lot of crossover between physical therapy and personal training because they both involve movement and they both involve different modalities related to that.
I think it's interesting being in the line of work of being a massage therapist. I teach yoga, and so you're doing fitness, and that our scope of practice for me is physical touch as a massage therapist, and then more customized private yoga sessions for that person based on what I feel in the tissue, but also within scope of practice because I'm not there as a personal physical therapist. But what I found really interesting over the years is how my understanding of fascial trains and structural parts of how the body works and pain as a massage therapist, it's so often that we get all the time at our clinic people coming in that have tried physical therapy and unfortunately it didn't do the thing they need. And that's so disheartening because there are amazing physical therapists out there. I'm not saying anyone's doing anything right or wrong, but it's really challenging when I have a friend of mine who's a physical therapist, and if someone comes in with pain on one quadrant, according to a lot of times what they're able to do with insurance is they have to treat that quadrant of the body if it's a shoulder issue. But if they're having a shoulder issue because their structure is imbalanced because they're more heavy on their right side with their weight, and then there's just the whole building structure of the body is off because of either muscle weaknesses somewhere or the fascia restrictions or tightness in the body, they can't even treat that side of the body, that right hip, or work on that right leg or work on the structure to get everything back. And I find that really interesting because it's not a systems approach. And I think that they're catching up. I believe that's where physical therapy is going. But I'm curious if you've had any experiences with this, because again, we're not here to say that we can treat pain. You're here to work with strengthening and building mobility and balance with your line of work. But I found so often people come to us and have amazing experiences. So just for example, I had someone in my yoga class last night that every time they're in a specific pose, they're hurting. And I said, let me come over here and look at your structure. Okay, based on I basically was coaching him into doing it, which I'm sure you do that. Here's the way that you can do it without injury or without pain. And then there's this, oh my gosh, I've been doing this incorrectly the whole time. And for this person, that their lower back is hypertonic, it's really tight, and they don't have upper back like rhomboids. The erectors of the upper back are really just they're lengthened and they're weak. And so to me, I was like, this just to do the pose correctly, make sure you're engaging these muscles. And they're like, oh my gosh, the pain's gone. This is what I need. So anyway, I'm curious about your experience with that because it is something that on some level we are still helping. We all have our place in the line of things and within our scope of practice. But how often does it happen to you? Because it happens to us all the time.
Yeah, it's one of my qualms, I guess, with how pain is addressed within the modern health industry. It's something I hear often from clients is I've been to X number of physical therapists and I got a little bit of relief temporarily and then they go back to being in pain. So they're treating the symptom but not treating the dysfunction. And I do think that things are headed in a better direction where it's more holistic, but it's a very slow process and insurance does drive a lot of what is covered, which is a big factor for a lot of individuals going to physical therapy. Again, like coming back to having a network of other individuals that you can refer out to, I think is really key. I've developed some relationships with local physical therapists. I have 3 different physical therapists I refer out to. I've actually gone to them myself for my own issues I've dealt with and had them work with me, going through their process. And I think they're great. And the one thing that differentiates them from a lot of therapy clinics, which is most of them, is you're not going in and working with somebody different every time. You're not being told to do a sheet of exercises that are, again, cookie cutter, that if you have a back issue, here's the back exercises. No one is that simplified in seeing results from an approach like that. Having that one-on-one where you're working with somebody, they get to know you, usually takes a few sessions, you're looking at the body holistically, and then having an intake, I think is really key in that, because if you're not assessing, you're guessing, is a term that I've heard used many times. So if you don't know where someone's starting point is, you can't know what it is that you're working with, and you can't really make informed decisions. So assessing is really key, and that's one of the things I think is key for why I refer out to who I do, or why I do the intake process that I do.
I think there's high value there. The connection that comes from building a relationship with someone who's helping them and really listening to them, not just, like you said, cookie cutter, but really listening to them and attuning to them. And I think that's really where there's a lot of healing emotionally. Like the body relaxes when it's okay, this person's listening to me. This is okay, this didn't work. And then they've shifted the protocol for me. And I think that's really where care and that component that we have that's missing from our allopathic medicine model. I was in a recent CE class. He was talking about how specifically licensed massage therapists are some of the last professionals that have the license to touch and with attuned, aware touch. Yes, physical therapists are doing that, but they're doing less and less hands-on from what they were sharing. And that may be completely incorrect, but there's this moving to not touching. Is that something that you've experienced, or are they still moving with physical touch in the PT work that you're seeing?
In the PT work that I'm seeing, is still very much hands-on manual therapy. And I don't, again, like I don't do manual therapy, but there's tools that you can use that in the fitness industry, I think is evolved in order to heal thyself. You have more recovery tools, things like foam rollers, some of the smaller like tennis ball size items for myofascial release, for doing positional release. And there are different ways that you can do that on your own, but it still involves a professional's touch. I think there's something more intuitive when you have someone else who is an outside perspective, kind of feeling their way around, like with massage, or being able to look at the whole picture, where a lot of times when we're in it, we oftentimes can't see what's going on a micro level.
Speaking about injury and recovery, what are the common things that you see that lead to pain or injury, and what are your supports in your work to help people avoid that?
Yeah, one of the parts of the intake process that I use is called the FMS. It stands for the Functional Movement Screen. And the organization that I'm certified through is also FMS, which stands for Functional Movement Systems, not to be confused with the screening portion. But they offer several certifications, and the founders are physical therapists themselves. They also have been in the exercise realm for a long time and kind of paved the way for that bridging the gap between physical therapy and personal training and athletic training, where that's often missing, where there's a friendly handoff between somebody who is in pain and then they go through physical therapy and then they reach a certain point, they're discharged. And a lot of times somebody would be on their own at that point, but this organization has, I think, helped to bridge the gap in the industry where there is more of a friendly handoff between physical therapist, personal trainer. Hey, this is what we've been working on. This is what you can continue to work on through these tools. So one of those tools is, as I said, that the FMS, which is a screening process. And it doesn't specifically look at pain, but it looks at the body as a whole. So you're looking at different movement patterns. And those movement patterns go all the way back to when you're an infant and you're going
Yes.
through the developmental stages. So being on your back, being able to come up and crawl, being able to kneel, being able to stand, being able to balance on one leg, and that developmental process that happens. So it's going back to the fundamentals of how we learn to move when we were infants, and then assessing different movement patterns from there. What I like about this tool is it's a screen. If you go to your doctor and you get screened for diabetes, they're not going to tell you have diabetes based on the screen. They're going to say you're low, medium, or high risk based on the risk factors, based on blood testing and other risk factors. So I like to compare what the FMS screening tool is compared to something like that, in the sense of it's not a pass or fail. There's movement patterns. I look at the movement patterns when somebody first comes to see me, and based on how they move, if there's any limitations, if there's any pain, then there's, are they low, are they medium, are they high risk when it comes to risk of future injury. And it's a helpful way to, again, assess instead of guess when I'm developing a program with somebody. So it's one thing to have there's the subjective information that they give me on their intake form, their perceived experience of what it is that they're dealing with, what they want to work on. And then there's a more objective approach, which is like the screening tool. which is, can you do this or can't you do this? This is part of the developmental stage of movement. And then from there, if there's pain, refer out for pain, but that doesn't necessarily mean somebody has to stop there. I can still work with somebody, and there's all these other movement patterns that somebody might have that they can still work on without increasing injury risk. And then while they work on this other thing over here, maybe from a previous injury that they never rehabilitated, or maybe from chronic use injury. It's one of the tools that I use, and I think that's a great way to screen for movement rather than focus in on the pain, because I'm sure you found this as well. Oftentimes where the pain is originating from is usually not the problem area. It's usually coming from elsewhere.
Yeah, that's the kicker. And we do so much education of that and over again. So, especially when you're getting paid for an hour, and sometimes people aren't coming back for a set of coaching sessions with you, like the training sessions. It's, hey, if your low back is hurting and they want you to rub their back to the cows come home and deep tissue it. But what is a psoas issue? And we have to educate them. Why are you going to be going into my abdomen? My back pain is in my back. So that's so common. And I think that the education, we can't say that enough if you're out there listening, that working with someone like Zach or a therapist that has. So what about the no pain, no gain mindset that still runs in our culture? Because that's where I personally work with a lot of people that are burned out, that are working with chronic stress, even big T, little t trauma, and their nervous systems are not geared, in my opinion, to have this really strenuous push. Now, sometimes people are very mentally active and they need to work out hard just to get their body and the excess energy just to chill out, and then the nervous system can relax. But I'm curious about your perspective on this mentality in general, and also that type of population that might be pushing really hard, and what type of exercises are better for them. Is it really contributing to more like adrenal fatigue and what we're seeing in burnout?
Yeah, I'd say it really depends on your goal. If your goal is short-term athletic performance and you're competitive and you want to push and see how far your body can go, then by all means. But if your goal is longevity and you're looking to be around for a while and you want your joints and your body, we only have one body. You can replace joints, but you can't replace your body, at least not yet. So I'm more the frame of mind of longevity, training for longevity, of thinking long term when it comes to movement. You can challenge your body, but no pain, no gain is often implying that pain is necessary in order to have some sort of gain. I often have some clients too will say, I wasn't sore after last workout. I'll say, that's a good thing. That means that your body's adapting to the load. If you're sore after every workout, it's likely that you're overtraining, especially if you're sore for several days. So I think the goal with training, again, if your goal is to be around for a while, and you can still have attainable athletic goals or performance goals and not be constantly breaking down muscle and being at the point of burnout. Because really, exercise is just another stressor amongst many others. It's a physical stress on the body. And especially in, I think, modern society, we have so many stressors and they're all going into this funnel. And physical stress is just an additional one to add to that. So why would you want your workouts or your movement to add to stress that you already have? Another key piece with this is when you work out, especially if you do strength training, which I'm a big proponent of strength training because there's so many benefits from it. You're breaking down the body. There's a reason you feel sore afterward. You're creating micro tears in your muscle, and it's catabolic to the body. So your body actually gains more in the recovery stage and anabolic stage of rebuilding things when you're resting, when you're giving it nutrients that it needs through proper eating and eating well and getting sleep and drinking enough water. The somewhat more boring, consistent things, but that's really where anybody who's done training for any amount of time knows that the gains actually happen in the recovery period, not just the gym.
I'm curious as far as the holistic perspective of movement here, looking into, we talked about pain, we talked about recovery. injury prevention. What, and then no pain, no gain. So it doesn't have to be necessarily be that. What about the connection between the emotions and the body? Do you see physical movement supporting nervous system regulation or emotional release? And have you witnessed any transformations, like for people? This is beyond the physical body, like they have more mobility. What have you witnessed in people as you've worked with them in this capacity?
There's a lot of catching up to do when it comes to the science behind it. A lot of it has been more intuitive in that releasing from the body, but oftentimes I think where we fail is that we're focused on, like with modern therapy, focused on the words and the sharing of trauma from the past or something that we've maybe even a physical thing that we've been through, focused on the talk side of it, but not so much the physical manifestation, how that's been held in our body. I'm a strong believer that the nervous system holds memory. There's a book by Bessel van der called The Body Keeps the Score that's made its way in the mainstream and been pretty popular recently. So I think that oftentimes the body will store up that tension. Could look like muscle tension, could look like a recurring injury. It could look like a lot of things, but physical manifestations in that way. Using movement as a means of healing is really a key part to that process. I've started to incorporate things like mobility and deep breathing, doing these diaphragmatic breathing where you're stimulating the muscle around the diaphragm. And it's incredible to feel after you do that for a couple minutes. You start to feel things come up in your body. You notice tension in your neck. You might notice release. Maybe you're gripping in your fists and your hands relax. And there's these things we hold on to that oftentimes are subconscious and we're not even aware of it until we really become aware and connect with our bodies in that way.
This is the full scope of my work as a professional, is understanding the person from not just a physical structural point as a massage therapist. What emotional holding patterns do we see in the things they say, how the micro movements of their face, how they guard, how they hold themselves when they're talking about things that are stressors in their lives, including the words that they're using and the language. And I don't know if you know this, Zach, I'm a medium. So part of my journey is like I see energy fields around people. So there's patterns in just that, not just the physical form and the way they're speaking, the way they're holding their body. Like it's this huge systems approach to how someone is. And I think that somatic release, somatic working somatic movement, that word, we talk about that in our show. This concept of the body holding on to memory, the nervous system, it makes sense for our survival. And I think that we aren't aware of our body enough yet as a collective to really dive deeper into this. I think we are with the work you do. It's all about becoming aware of your body and knowing your limitations, knowing how to hold your body when you're doing an exercise, and just checking in between sessions when you're recovering. I think this is important because I think we live in a disembodied society that we're not aware of what's going on because of the response in the body and the brain when we get pushed into some of the trauma responses, fight, flight, fawn, freeze. We go into the mental body of what should I do? And we become hyper aware of our body and hold on to things, and we're very rigid. But this is the line of everything that I do. So I'm curious with the, just even working with someone, like a simple perspective, someone that maybe is holding a lot of tension in their chest and they're curving in, collapsing in on themselves. With working with strengthening their upper back and improving their posture, I think a simple thing, working out in general, gains you this sense of self-confidence with the continued consistency and seeing the results. But even that change in posture, I think really shifts the nervous system to orient more to the space of feeling that you're more centered and safe and even confident. So what have you seen with that in working with clients?
Yeah, quite a bit over the years. One of the things that stands out most recently is I had a client who I work with, and he's in my older adults group, but I train him in person. And one day I walked in and I could tell he was feeling emotionally down and just struggling with some different circumstances. And by the time I left, just totally see, after he did some movement, we talked, totally see his demeanor change And then I got a text message from him later on in the day just saying, wow, I can't believe how different I feel after 45 minutes of movement and just talking with you. It's small, but to me that made my day to hear that was that impactful, that he was feeling that significant of an impact after. And many more stories with just client transformations, clients I've worked with for years that have undergone major transformations in their lives. And another client I think of who started working with me during the pandemic and now has achieved so much just from building self-confidence, is even leading an outdoors group, and just very proud of her and proud of all the other clients I've worked with that have just put in the work and have seen the results beyond just the physical results.
I think the more you become aware of your own body, you start to tune into how you're feeling and how certain circumstances make you feel. Or even if you're at a family gathering, which is a big trigger for people of their stuff that they hold in their body, like they start to carry themselves or tight after a conversation with a parent or a sibling. And if you just notice what your body does and how your body reacts and start to see those patterns, even when you're not around your family, of, oh, wow, when I have this circumstance or this perceived threat in this way, my body reacts this way. Oh, wow, a longstanding holding pattern of this seems to be causing pain for me. So I think those are just very like self-subjective experiences that we can have of this connection that I encourage people all the time for that awareness.
I think awareness is so key. If there's one takeaway from our conversation, it's awareness. By creating more awareness, it's the pathway to so many other things. But there are practical ways to get more awareness, and that's what we're talking about too.
Yeah, if we have awareness of the patterns that move us into having behaviors that are poor behaviors for our own health, whether it's sleep hygiene, even relational, like things that we used to put up with boundary wise, lack of boundaries, the quality of our food, all those things. If the awareness is the foundation of all of it, and it is something that I was just talking to someone yesterday, like this is, if you would take everything I do and put it into a nutshell, it's like training people how to have self-awareness in these different areas of their life. Yeah. So I think it's definitely, I like that you said it seems so simple and seems, but it's the foundation of everything. I think that often when people want to make lifestyle shifts and they say they want to go to see a personal trainer, they want to eat differently, there are a lot of times barriers to that. And a lot of those are with programs, patterns, behaviors that they may not be aware of that either sabotage their success or they're continuing to be consistent. So could you tell us a little bit about how you work with that and how do you help people move into sustainable, consistent changes, whether it's with their diet or with movement or mindset or elsewhere?
That's another hat that I wear, is I call it the coaching hat. In meeting with someone and hearing what their goals are, it is imperative that I get to the why, because without the why, it is just moving more in the direction of giving them a program that is that cookie cutter, and then breaking that down into bite-sized pieces. And that looks totally different for everybody. I like to use scales. When I say scales, like scale of 1 to 10, keep it really simple. When I meet with someone and they have a goal in mind, a follow-up question I often ask is, how likely are you to follow through on this goal that we've just identified? And if they say anything less than an 8 out of 10, then we're revisiting the goal because they should have 80+% confidence that on their worst day, everything goes awry, that they're going to be able to follow through on this action. And that's how I like to do it. We break it down into micro level actions weekly or daily. So practically, just to give you an example, let's say somebody wants to eat better. Their big goal is weight loss. Part of that, they want to eat more in the direction of more whole foods, less processed foods, less sugar. Their goal might be, I want to eat 3 meals a day. And then we break that down even more. What do those meals look like? And we set a goal together, creating a SMART goal that's attainable, reasonable, timely, and so on. And then again, revisiting, is this at least 80% out of 100% that you would be able to do this on if everything goes awry? And usually if we can identify that and the why behind it, someone's much more likely to be successful in following through on whatever the intention is.
I love that 80% rule. I think that just feels good, just that you do that. I'm really glad you do that.
Yeah, I think it's practical.
Yeah, no, it's coming down to the practicality of things to really make sustainable changes for people, I think, is where we see the progress and then we continue to keep going because there's momentum that's building. And I think we need those small wins to keep going.
Absolutely.
So for the listeners here, what are some small shifts that maybe someone can do to start just prioritizing their health today?
Yeah, I'll come back to what I said earlier about awareness. I recently have been shifting some of my focus to working with single dads or dads who are struggling with finding time in their schedule. And very first day of the reset is creating awareness, because before you move on to anything else, if you're not aware of how you're spending your time each day, if there's leaks of time, a little bit here on social media, a little bit here, spending on scrolling through emails, responding to things that aren't important, no matter what you say is important, your calendar and how you spend your time will actually show how you're prioritizing things. So if there's that disconnect between what you say is important and how you're actually spending your time, that's a really good place to start, is creating awareness around that. Begin to just look back at your day. One of the things that I implement sometimes with clients who are working on nutrition goals is a food journal. Because again, the goal with that is to create awareness around what are you actually eating? How much are you eating? How often are you eating? Creating that awareness through writing down how am I spending my time? Am I prioritizing, if I say I want to work out 3 times a week, am I prioritizing that above these other things? Am I keeping that promise to myself? And that's another thing that builds self-confidence too, is keeping a promise. If you say you're going to do something, you do it.
Yeah.
I think for the listeners, start with creating awareness by looking at how you're spending your time, look at your actions and if they're lining up with your intentions. And if you're not, that's a good place to start. And if you need help, reach out to one of us for help with that process.
Yes. Thank you. Could you share with us any more about how we can get in touch with you, what it looks like working with you, or anything else you have that's exciting coming up?
You can find me on social media, but I'm on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me under Thrive Fitness Trainer on both. And then my website is thrive-fitness.com. You can find out more about my training there and a little bit of my background. And yeah, as far as if you're interested in working together, best place to go is my website. There's a contact form on there. And if you have any questions, you can reach out. My contact information's there. But yeah, I do a very lengthy intake process because, again, I want to find out where my clients are coming from, what their starting point is, go through that initial screening, find out how someone moves, find out where their goals are, and then really create a program from there. And then it looks like one-on-one coaching. I just love getting to know people I'm working with. I take personal investment in their health and their success and their outcomes.
Thanks for your time with us today, Zach. I have two final questions that I always ask anyone when they've come onto our show. And so my first one for you is, what is your current favorite wellness practice or self-care indulgence right now for yourself?
I would say journaling, because awareness, it really creates awareness. And I've found it to be incredibly helpful to bring some of the subconscious things that I'm thinking about or dealing with in my life to the surface. So journaling is a great way to process. I've I'd like to say I do it every day, but I have not been. But I do it several times throughout the week, and every time I do it, I'm glad I did it. I feel like more grounded, more self-aware, and usually there's some sort of takeaway for me.
Yes, it is hands down the number one foundational tool. If I had to choose like like that would be the thing that to keep me,
Mhm.
because, say you're immobilized and you can't move and you
Yeah.
can't feed yourself, anymore. Like I have that thing where I can mobilize myself mentally, emotionally to overcome, to deep dive, to, work through patterns and limitations. And I think that, like, hands down, that's for me. I love that you do that. It's so cool. And it's so rewarding when you do it. It always is. All right.
Sometimes I'll journal I'll set a timer for 5 minutes and end up doing it for 20 or 30 minutes.
All right, Zach. So what about the second question then? This is our final question.
Mhm.
If you could detox one thing in your life or the world, what would it be?
We are in a time right now where things are so polarized, and it feels often, if you're on social media or just out in the world interacting with people, that you have to take a side or have to think one way or another. So I'd have to say having a more integrated approach, seeing the nuance and seeing the gray area in between. I'd detox the need to take sides or to feel like you have to think a certain way, and then that doesn't leave room for something that might be in contrast to that.
Opens it up for new perspectives. Yes, absolutely. I agree. I think that if we had more awareness of what other options there are, other perspectives other than right, wrong, up, down, that's the way, this is not the way, I think that would help us in every aspect of our lives. So, yes. Thank you so much for your time, for being with us today, Zach. I'm looking forward for everyone to reach out and connect with you and learn more about Zach, follow him on social media. And other than that, we appreciate all of you guys out there listening.
Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox podcast. If you love this podcast, share it with others and leave us a review. Your reviews help us more than you know and supports us continuing to make episodes and being heard from all over the world. You can also follow the link in our show notes to submit a topic that you would like to hear on the show.